So this one we're going to look at now is called Blowing the Dynamite from the May 1933 edition of the Catholic Worker newspaper.
Writing about the Catholic Church, a radical writer says, Rome will have to do more than to play a waiting game. She will have to use some of the dynamite inherent in her message. To blow the dynamite of a message is the only way to make the message dynamic. If the Catholic Church is not today the dominant social dynamic force, it is because Catholic scholars have failed to blow the dynamite of the Church. Catholic scholars have taken the dynamite of the Church, have wrapped it up in nice phraseology, placed it in a hermetic container, and sat on the lid. It is about time to blow the lid off so the Catholic Church may again become the dominant social dynamic force. So this essay, it's the third essay that Peter had printed in the very first issue of the newspaper. So I view it as kind of part of his Magna Carta of essays. And we see here, a number, there's a lot going on here. One is, I'm sure it's a purposeful play between the words dynamite and dynamic. We see the word dynamite a lot. And truthfully, I'd imagine it was a scary word back then, but I guess, with pipe bombs and school shootings and this, every time I hear this essay, it just sets off alarm bells. It seems more harsh than other essays, I think, because of that dynamite. And I think that's probably one of the reasons he chose it. He wanted it to click with people. The hermetic container, which my understanding, I know I looked this up at one point, but I think it's, when you do official canning and seal it, like you're canning vegetables, it's, a very tight seal. So to emphasize that this message of the Church has been really compounded in a way that you can't even once it's canned, you probably can't even smell it. It's just so far away, it looks more like it's a museum piece than something for today. So I did notice in this essay, he never mentions what exactly that message is that he's talking about. So I guess when I read this essay, there's two questions that come to my mind. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to the first one. The second one, I'm not as sure about. The first one being, what is the message? And the second question being, do we want the Church to be this dominant social force in our world? For Peter, it was an obvious yes. I think for many folks today, even for many Catholics, there might be second thoughts about whether we'd want the Catholic Church to be the dominant social force in our society. For the first message, for the first part about the message, I'm quite sure that he's talking about church documents like Rerum Novarum by Pope Leo XIII, and 40 years later by Pius XI, that the Catholic Church, going to church isn't just a place to pray. It's not just an individual act. There are social implications of caring for our brothers and sisters, of trying to organize society in a way that it's more just, that if someone works for an employer, that they're paid a just wage in order to live on and raise their family. And there are all these things that I think are perhaps more well known now, but often, had often, even until recently, and sometimes even still are called can't remember the phrase I'm thinking of, but kind of the unknown message of the Church. It's not always highly publicized, especially depending on what church you go to. But Theo, what were your thoughts on this essay?
Oh, I mean, just responding to the things you said, there's so much to talk about. Um, yeah, I guess I wonder if that message of Rerum Novarum, of like just wages for workers, of workers' right to organize and to agitate for just wages, like, is that well known today? Like, maybe it's more than in Peter's. I guess I'll leave that to you. You're the PhD. But it's not something you like hear at church very often, you know. And I think that, and that's the thing about a lot of what I would point to for what I like in Catholic Church teachings, like nuclear weapons, not allowed, right? Have you ever heard a non-Catholic worker priest talk about that seriously at mass? You know, like the death penalty generally in our US American circumstance, you know, like, but how often is that preached as like part of the sermon, you know, let alone like a worker's right to unionize or whatever. And when people think of the Catholic Church, like, that isn't what they think about. Like, what they think about is like abortion, and they think about like gay marriage, and stuff like that. And I think that that is like, rightly or wrongly, what a lot of people think about the Catholic Church and like what the Catholic Church's teaching is. And I don't blame them for getting that the message that that is the extent of what Catholic teaching is. And it is, you know, is dynamite a threatening word? Like, uh you'll get your congregation to blow up at you probably if you start focusing your homilies on this
Hmm.
too often at church. You know, if you start talking about uh poverty of Saint Francis in a serious way, if you acknowledge that Jesus says, "Woe to you, rich," you know, it is dangerous for folks. Um, it's an interesting time. I was asking myself that same question about, should the Catholic Church be a social dynamic force? Do people want it to be? And I think it's an interesting time because in many ways people are not interested in the Catholic Church for many good reasons, for all this clergy sex abuse stuff. Um, People are trying to wrestle with like historic wrongs in more serious ways, in which the Catholic Church is very uh not even just like complicit, but like coming up with the doctrine of discovery and like owning slaves and stuff like that. Like, these are perfectly good reasons for people to be turned off to the Catholic Church. Um, and like I said, I think a lot of people, if you ask what is the Catholic Church's social program, they'd probably say gay marriage bad, abortion bad. Um, but at the same time, we have like had this glimpse of like Pope Francis, who is not perfect on everything, but like when he wrote Laudato Si, like people were reading a papal encyclical uh in a more serious way than I've ever seen in my lifetime. It was getting like covered in the news. People were reprinting it, and the message of that, there's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I mean, just broadly about like talking about the environment, but like our economic situation and credit and technology and like some really important stuff. So folks were taking that seriously all of a sudden when we had this pope who maybe had tried to blow a little bit of that dynamite. Um, Quite honestly, I think if we were to ever have the Catholic Church be like thought of as a serious social dynamic force, it will take like some sort of like huge reckoning. Um, like, it will not include cheap grace. I've been advocating for a while um, that what the Catholic Church should do is sell all of their stuff and give it to the poor and the people they've wronged, and we can start having mass at the park, like, or at somebody's house, like the apostles did, because like that, and if the Holy Spirit wants it to grow back up, then it will. But that like is that would be a moral statement. That would be like, hey, look at why you should listen to us. But like I was saying, like we were saying, like I don't know that that's like a game they want to play. You know, uh, we can
Yeah.
talk about poverty a lot in Catholic land and consider it holy, but uh, it's not always played out that way in the real world.
Yeah, when you, I think the going back to your example of Pope Francis and Laudato Si, one of the other things that had occurred to me is even if the Catholic Church was willing to stress this social justice message that Peter once stressed, would the Catholic Church simply be ignored? Would it be actually become a social dynamic, a dominant social force? I think your example of Pope Francis with Laudato Si is an example of where when stuff on that level is said, it does resonate with people, and it does resonate even outside the Catholic Church because people want to take advantage of that authority there now in a good way. And it did remind me that of, I believe it was with Pacem in Terris, which was an encyclical by John the 23rd in the early 60s, Latin for peace on earth, where he stressed the rights of individuals and the rights of groups, especially groups that are vulnerable in a society, and are everyone's responsibility to make sure that individuals and groups can live out the lives that they should be able to live out. And with the tensions between nuclear tensions between Russia and the United States, kind of this message of a basic justice, but also as the letter continued on with its stress on world peace, it was a letter, it was an encyclical that was published, I believe, in its entirety in the New York Times during the early 60s, which may have been the first time that that happened. And I don't know if it's happened since, but just a reminder that when people are willing to take those chances, and for the Pope to do, for Pope Francis and for Pope John, I wouldn't necessarily say they were taking chances, but even you can see when they just start moving in that direction a little bit, people react usually, some negatively, but also many positively outside the Catholic Church.